Clinical trials are tightly constrained environments. Their sample sizes are restricted to just a few thousand participants. That makes it mathematically impossible to detect rare adverse effects that might only appear in 1 out of every 100,000 patients. These trials also operate under highly controlled conditions. Patients are monitored closely, specific doses are administered on exact schedules, and adherence is carefully verified, conditions that rarely reflect the messy reality of everyday human behavior. Furthermore, they run for relatively short durations. Risks that require years of continuous exposure to develop remain entirely hidden during the testing phase. The day a drug receives market approval, that isolation ends. It transitions from a restricted test bubble into a vast, unrestricted global population. Suddenly, the medication encounters highly unpredictable variables. It interacts with complex patient comorbidities, and physicians begin prescribing it off-label for conditions it was never specifically tested to treat. This forces a transition from passive adverse event reporting to proactive pharmacovigilance. Regulators must actively search for, assess, and minimize risks as they emerge. A drug's true safety profile is not permanently established at market approval. It is engineered continuously through systematic monitoring across its entire commercial lifespan. In the European Union, the primary regulatory body responsible for this ongoing evaluation is the European Medicines Agency, or EMA. Across the Atlantic, the United States assigns this responsibility to the Food and Drug Administration. The EMA tackles drug safety through a universal baseline architecture known as the Risk Management Plan, or RMP. The FDA takes a completely contrasting approach. They utilize the Risk Evaluation and Mitigation Strategy, or REMS, which operates as a highly selective, targeted intervention. These two divergent regulatory architectures are attempting to solve the exact same problem, mapping the precise boundary where maximum patient safety meets vital therapeutic access. The EMA's risk management plan is a universal mandate. Every single new marketing authorization application submitted in the EU must include an RMP. This is not just a static document. It must be continuously updated by the manufacturer whenever new safety data emerges post-authorization. As this blueprint shows, the RMP is built on a 7-part layout. The scientific core is Part 2, the safety specification. This categorizes adverse events with sufficient evidence under the strict label of important identified risks. It also requires documenting important potential risks. These are adverse events with a valid clinical basis for suspicion, even if the direct scientific association remains unconfirmed. Crucially, the EMA requires an explicit category for missing information. This legally obligates the manufacturer to identify populations excluded from the original clinical trials, like pediatric, geriatric, or pregnant patients. To address these concerns, Part V of the RMP outlines risk minimization measures. This separates routine labeling from additional risk minimization measures, which deploys specific interventions like targeted educational materials for prescribers. The EMA system operates on a clear regulatory assumption. Every single medicinal product requires a comprehensive, proactive safety map from day one. The FDA operates on a highly selective premise. REMS programs are not required for every new drug entering the U.S. market. Out of the thousands of medications currently approved, there are only roughly 60 to 70 active REMS programs at any given time. The FDA pulls the REMS trigger specifically when they determine that standard product labeling alone is legally insufficient to manage a serious risk. A basic REMS framework relies on 2 components: mandatory medication guides for patients and formal communication plans for providers. But for the highest risk profiles, the FDA deploys the most restrictive component: Elements to Assure Safe Use, or ETASU. ETASU transcends basic information sharing. It legally imposes mandatory conditions on exactly how a drug is prescribed, dispensed, and consumed. These conditions can mandate specific laboratory testing before a patient receives a refill, or they can restrict the drug's administration strictly to certified hospital settings. The EMA builds a foundational safety map. The FDA's REMS operates as a powerful, tactical intervention deployed specifically to save a dangerous drug from total market withdrawal. The necessity for these intense regulatory controls is rooted in historical tragedy. In the mid-20th century, thalidomide caused thousands of severe birth defects globally. Decades later, when thalidomide was repurposed for new clinical treatments, its severe teratogenic risks forced regulators to create the STEPS program, an early precursor to the highly restrictive REMS frameworks used today. A modern, widely known application of these strict ETASU restrictions is the iPledge program for isotretinoin, a powerful acne medication. This workflow chart shows the first gate, mandatory certification for the physician and pharmacy. Gate 2 requires negative pregnancy tests. The final gate enforces electronic verification. If unmet, the system locks out dispensing. Similar controls are applied across broader classes of medication. The opioid crisis prompted a shared system REMS, requiring multiple manufacturers to fund accredited safe prescribing education. ETAS programs prove that regulators can engineer strict operational hard stops into healthcare systems. These barriers ensure that highly dangerous, but highly vital, drugs remain accessible to the patients who need them. Structurally, the EMA's RMP documents a complete clinical safety profile. The FDA's REMS skips the baseline profiling to focus purely on actionable mitigation strategies. The RMP explicitly integrates post-market surveillance activities, like patient registries and signal detection, directly into its own framework. The FDA handles surveillance through separate regulatory mechanisms entirely outside of REMS. The loss of brand exclusivity also complicates these models differently. U.S. generic manufacturers must navigate complex shared system REMS alongside the original manufacturer, while EU generic applicants typically address safety outside of a full RMP. For global pharmaceutical companies, this creates a demanding operational reality. A single drug requires two entirely different compliance architectures and distinct internal teams depending on the continent. Both frameworks strive to optimize the benefit-risk ratio, but their differing legal foundations dictate drastically different corporate risk management strategies. The central challenge facing both the EMA and the FDA is empirically proving that these interventions actually work in practice. It is easy to track process indicators, like the sheer number of educational pamphlets printed. It is far more difficult to isolate true outcome indicators, such as a verifiable statistical drop in hospitalizations. Shifting baseline clinical practices, new concurrent treatments, and natural variations in patient demographics act as confounding variables, making those outcome indicators incredibly difficult to verify. This creates an inherent friction between safety and accessibility. Every restriction imposed to protect a patient also acts as a barrier to their treatment. Overly complex programs, particularly those mandating frequent blood draws or specialized certifications, can delay critical treatment initiation for vulnerable populations. The FDA explicitly tracks this friction during their periodic assessments, formally evaluating whether the REMS requirements have become unduly burdensome to the healthcare system. The ultimate regulatory paradox is that perfect safety guarantees zero access. The objective is to optimize the precise tension point where maximum clinical safety meets maximum therapeutic availability. To better locate that tension point, regulators are moving past static safety documents and relying on a massive influx of real-world data. This data flows continuously from electronic health records, large-scale claims databases, and emerging digital health tools. Instead of relying entirely on manual review, artificial intelligence and machine learning models are now scanning these databases to prioritize adverse event signals at unprecedented speeds. Natural language processing algorithms are being deployed to instantly analyze spontaneous field reports and global medical literature, identifying complex safety patterns in real time. Through organizations like the International Council for Harmonization, global convergence efforts are attempting to use these new data standards to finally bridge the gap between the EMA and FDA frameworks. The goal of modern pharmacovigilance is to engineer intelligent, adaptable systems that empower prescribers, preserve clinical access, and rigorously protect patients in a highly complex world.